Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the bin that I want to feed today is this system right here. And it's funny because when I watched the video from the last time we checked in, it was 12 days ago, I had this feeling like I had put so much bedding in here, it felt to me like the whole system had almost filled up, like there was going to be no more room to put any more bedding in here. So I think it was just a little bit of an optical illusion, but I was very generous last time. So at first I thought maybe we wouldn't even need to put bedding in here, but where's the fun in that? I did make up a whole fresh batch of bedding the other day, and I added a lot of moisture to this batch, so it's quite heavy. So my intention was to add some bedding today, because it does seem like there's plenty of room in here. I did at first worry that maybe there isn't, but we're going to go for it. And that's going to go hand in hand with a pretty generous feeding, a little bit more than they got last time. Last time they got some coffee, a couple little pieces of corn, but this is probably, in weight at least, probably twice that right now. This is a whole bunch of pumpkin, and really pumpkin just bringing with it a whole bunch of moisture. It's just a whole bunch of water locked up inside this frozen vegetable. As soon as it thaws out, it's going to dump its moisture out. It really won't end up being much food, mostly moisture. And I think this system really needed it last time. I pretty much doused it. Besides what I thought was a lot of bedding, I also added what I thought was a lot of water. Very curious to see how it's holding up. So I'm going to put on a glove, and we're going to get to work. And I gotta tell you, because I had that feeling that I had put so much bedding into here, it felt like we could probably go quite a while before coming back in here to feed, because it seemed like even though the food portion given was a bit minimal, it did seem like with all the bedding they got, they could turn to that as their source of nourishment if they run out of the kitchen scraps type food. And that's typically the case in your worm bins. If you're providing enough bedding, then even after they run out of their food, they're usually in good shape still by just eating the bedding that surrounds them. This is kind of like what we encountered last time. Since you've only got paper coverings, you're going to have somewhat dry top surface. So it's in some cases enough to be a little bit alarming. But at 166 days of age, this system does have a pretty good amount of casting material mixed in here amongst all the bedding, which means we probably don't need to go very deep to find some nice damp and comfortable material with wormies in it. Now, there was one kind of unusual thing in here which I'm a little bit curious of, and it's a red netted bag. I don't know, is it? It's here. I'll show it to you. Oh my goodness, look at that. So you can see it here. This red bag. It's the kind of red bag you get a piece of, like, a couple onions in or whatever. When I had finished the system that these worms that live in here came out of, I found some weird material in it. Some material that I wasn't sure if it was going to break down or not, so I wanted to keep it separate from the rest of the material. So I left it in this little red, wow, that is something else. This was a good size whole tomato. An entire tomato placed on here, thinking that the moisture from the tomato was going to drop down into the red bag, which was full of, like I said earlier, this weird material. This is unusual too. This is from the inside of the tomato, I believe. It's like some tomato guts, or maybe like part of where the stem was, like a tougher portion of the vegetable. The only part of it that they couldn't seem to eat, in addition to the skin itself. That's amazing. Just looks like they just crawled up right into the thing and gobbled it up. Because that was the one thing we noticed, that this material was barren of any activity, and it seemed like what we really wanted to do was drive worm traffic into it to see if the material that was in question would in fact break down with a little bit of worm traffic. I needed to get the worms back into this stuff. And it does seem like the tomato did the trick. Excellent. And you know what else is pretty excellent? This is the stuff right here that I was calling into question. It's shredded up just like all the rest of the material in the bin, so you'll see it has the same dimensions of all the other stuff that goes through my shredder, but this stuff has sort of a translucent look to it. It's a little bit see-through almost, and I guess what drew my attention was how it didn't seem to want to just tear. It seemed like if I tugged on it, it would be a little bit springy, a little bit elastic. And I think some people theorize that it might be the tape from Amazon boxes. I think it might have been Ann over on the Plant Obsessed channel who mentioned how I think she had noticed the tape on the Amazon boxes having that sort of springy, weird, I don't know, how do you say it? Springiness to it. But you know what? The bottom line is I think that material is really not something to worry about, because while I'm still noticing one or two little bits of it here and there, over those past almost 2 weeks, those 12 days since we last checked in here and placed that tomato on top of this thing and drew a bunch of worms back into it as well, it seems like they've been busy in here sucking up the tomato juice, obviously, and nibbling on the tomato itself. But I think the really cool thing is that the all that questionable material that I wasn't sure if it would even break down does look like it's gradually getting there. Because I think just the overall impression is that there's just not as much of it in here anymore as there had been. But I think the most important thing is that there are worms in it, because we did jack up the moisture and we did let tomato juice drip down into it. So the worms are clearly not put off by the material. It's material that I was questioning, you know, whether the worms would even want to hang out in it or not. And I thought like the tomato would really be the deciding factor. We would know right away. I'm going to put the tomato right back in here. What the heck, right? The tomato was associated to this red bag, and we'll just keep it there until the worms can polish it off. And I think we're going to do the same exact thing here. We're going to take the we're going to take some of that pumpkin and rest it right on top of this so that the moisture coming out of the pumpkin can drop right down into there and continue to promote activity down within the system. So I feel moisture, you know, I feel dampness down here within all this bedding. And there we go, there's worms hanging out in it. It felt to me like last time I had to go right down through the somewhat dry bedding in the feeding area, down into the material at the very, very bottom of the bin to find the worms. And here too, you know, if we go right to the bottom, to the most damp material at the very bottom, you know, you're going to find a good number of worms down in there. And I worry a little bit, you know, because sometimes I feel like they're retreating to the bottom to get into material moist enough for them to be comfortable in. Kind of makes me wonder if adding more moisture would be necessary. When I know I'm feeding with a material like pumpkin that's going to bring with it a good bit of moisture, I'm, you know, skeptical as to whether or not it's even needed. It feels like I could possibly be overdosing the worms with moisture if I add some alongside a very moisture-rich food item. I guess the other option would be to not let the moisture evaporate and just put a plastic covering on here and let whatever moisture we place in here remain in here, rather than letting the top surface go really dry. I feel like I'm repeating what I talked about last time. I'm pretty sure I touched on all those same considerations last time. But at that time we just opted not to add plastic coverings, even though we, you know, brought up the topic as a possibility, an option for us to follow. And the fact that it's gotten so dry down in here again, it makes me feel like maybe this time we're just going to go for it. We're going to go ahead and probably put a sheet of plastic across the top of this system to let the moisture that we add remain in it. And that's really still the remaining question in my head, I believe, is whether or not we're going to need to add moisture. Because the material in the bin's not bad as long as you get past the dry surface material that is a bit dry. I'm just wondering if combining it all together might be enough. It's just that once all this dry stuff gets blended in, it just seems like it has the potential to drag the entire moisture content of the bin down everywhere. So I don't know if I'm going to want to put my confidence in those pumpkin pieces to be able to restore moisture levels to normal in here again by themselves. It might make good sense for me to drop in a little bit of moisture, something I've been doing. Actually, it's only been done in one of my bins so far. I've been bringing the BTI back. I guess that means I took the time to whip up a batch of the Mosquito Dunks BTI solution. I reloaded my squirt bottle. So far, only one of my newer systems, a couple of my newer systems were treated with this stuff, just to make sure the flying insects don't start moving back in. I had tremendous success with the BTI, pretty much eliminating flying insects in all my systems. But I noticed that in a couple of my brand new systems where BTI had already not come into play, since I had already phased out its use by that time when those systems got put into service. I started noticing that the flying insects are starting to take advantage of that material in those bins where there's no BTI. So I reinstated the application of this stuff into my systems as a routine step, and I think we can do the same in here. And at the same time, we're going to bring with it a good bit of moisture too. So let's start thinking about getting this thing reconstructed. So this will stay down in the bottom, kind of like what we did last time. We attempted to reduce its overall height profile by attempting to spread it out and thin its overall thickness a little bit. And I got a feeling at some point we're going to be able to get rid of this red bag. All that stuff that I was concerned about, I think, is going to get broken down by the wormies. So I don't think there's too much reason for concern. But until such a time that I really do observe the better portion of that material as being gone, consumed by the worms, I like the idea of it just being sort of partitioned off from the rest of the material in the bin by being over in that netted bag. So I've got 5 pieces here, and I put 6 pieces here. I put more material onto here than I've got remaining at this point. That's fine. We're going to continue to let moisture work its way down into this bag so that it becomes really appealing for the worms to continue traveling into there to seek out food and stuff to nibble on. And I'm also thinking now's the time to just get my little BTI squirt bottle out here and begin applying moisture to stuff. A lot of stuff out here on the edges is what I'm going to return back over the feeding area as covering. So now's the time to give it a little shot of moisture. We can give it a little shot of moisture after the fact too, after we've dumped it into the feeding area. But let's proceed with the setup of the feeding area. I think I know why this container of prepared shredded paper and cardboard and leaves and everything is so heavy. It's because not only because I dampened it quite a bit, but to make more and more fit in here, I crammed it down into the container. So I sort of forced a bit more material into the container than I normally would, which is making it kind of heavy. Alright, so we're gradually covering up this feeding area pretty nicely with some nice bedding. We'll bring in what remains of the pumpkin and continue to try to spread it out across the feeding area nicely for the wormies. So I think they're going to appreciate this. Somehow, once again, it just doesn't seem like quite as much as I thought it was. But once again, I feel like I'm coming up on the overall, depth of the system. And once again, I could just be experiencing it as an optical illusion. But I definitely like the idea of giving the worms, a little bit more space to roam around in, to move into. Hopefully to try to expand their numbers in and try to propagate their population. Alright, here and there I'm bumping into little bits of leftover corn cob, which goes back to past couple feedings. And that stuff's going to take some time. Here and there when I bump into a larger bit of something, I'm figuring let's just get it down into the feeding area. Yeah, this material is littered with all kinds of bedding material now. There's all kinds of scraps of shredded paper and cardboard and everything in here. So the worms don't have to go far to find something to nibble on. I mean, they can go right to the middle of the bin, get some of that yummy pumpkin, but the cardboard and paper shredding, or shreds, or whatever you want to call it, the bedding, also serves as a food for the wormies. So, oh, you know what? One thing I had intended to include into the feeding is just a little bit of my worm chow also. I don't know, usually I add grit hand in hand with my worm chow, but I think, a system like this that's already received 12 feedings till now, this will be feeding number 13 here, I'm not so sure it's necessary to add grit every time. I think I even heard from one of the other worm channel people how, according to their reference materials, most worm farmers do overdo it with the application of grit. And a lot of people just write that off as, you know, ultimately a good thing for their garden by, you know, possibly putting a little extra calcium into their worm bin. If the worms don't make use of it, the plants eventually will. So it's all good from their point of view. Alright, I stepped away for a moment. One other thing I wanted to get from my supply shelf is some nice leafy material that we could sprinkle out across the top over here. I kind of like giving these African night crawlers an abundant amount of bedding to nibble on, since, you know, rumor has it that that's their preferred cuisine anyway. So as much as most worms will probably really be thankful for a big pile of pumpkin bits, I wonder sometimes if the African night crawlers are more excited when they know that they're getting an abundant supply of bedding added. And, you know, I think the best thing is to just keep applying some more of this, and I guess the quantity of moisture I could apply with this thing is limited. And as far as getting the BTI in, I feel like just with what we've sprayed in here already, we're probably doing enough to get the BTI culture in here, you know, kind of boost it up again to make sure the flying insects are not able to move in here and survive, basically. But you know what, I'm gonna get my spray bottle. I'd really like to douse this a little bit better than what I can do with this. So we're also going to use this as an opportunity for me to rinse off my glove a little bit and the sides of the bin a little bit. And we could tidy things up here a little before we cover up and put away. And, you know, we've hinted at it a number of times, and I do feel that it might make good sense at this point to reinstate plastic coverings. In fact, I can't even remember at this point whether or not we ever had plastic coverings. In all my systems that are younger than this one, I'm still running plastic coverings. It's usually in my older systems where I start to feel pretty confident in the casting material that's in there and the moisture content that it holds, that it's going to stay, you know, damp enough and comfortable enough for the worms to, you know, thrive in and be able to travel across the entire contents of the system without any hesitation. But, you know, when things start to get dry, the worms aren't going to go near that dry stuff. They're going to huddle down near the bottom. The system's just not going to be as productive as it could be. So I'm starting to wonder if it's time to maybe subject all these paper coverings to a whole bunch of additional worm traffic by covering the whole thing with plastic. As soon as all these things here, these pieces of paper that have up until now stayed very dry in the bin, by being covered with plastic, they're going to remain soaked and they're going to get full of worm traffic, as is all the leafy topping here. So I think the plastic covering is a very good idea. Let me go find something we could put on here for these little guys. Alrighty, here we go. This is a nice large size plastic bag, which pretty much has the capability to cover the entire system, edge to edge, all the way around. Even here, like the way the walls of the container are a little bit damp from me spraying, plastic can even stick to it a little bit, almost locking out the possibility of any airflow coming and going, to really protect and lock in the moisture within the system. Some people will criticize me for, you know, putting the coverings on so tight so that no airflow can occur. Here, I kind of like the idea of most of the system being able to retain its moisture, letting all the leaves on the top surface get damp and promote some nice worm traffic. And I think what we're going to find next time is worms spread out through the material, not just in the lower levels, hopefully enjoying the entire contents of the system, including the stuff that's near the top, stuff that will otherwise kind of lose its moisture to evaporation, become a little bit dry and inhospitable for the worms. This way, you know, hopefully we can promote a little bit more action in here. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Alright, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.